Imagine if your practice was not just a clinic, but a sanctuary where every procedure sculpted not only smiles, but the very fabric of your life. Today's episode isn't just about teeth, it's about carving out a masterpiece of work life harmony. Join us as we navigate the dental landscape with Kirk Teachout, who stands out as the master sculptor of professional boundaries, chiseling away to reveal the statue of a balanced, profitable practice beneath. Welcome to Thriving Practice, the show where we discuss all things business for practice owners, and we show you how to grow your practice without working more or burning out. I'm your host, Tracy Trapesky. I'm a business owner, consultant, executive coach, and an avid trial by error gardener. I am on a mission to help practice leaders take back their time while becoming exquisitely fulfilled, profitable business owners. I really dislike that so many practice owners are overworked and overwhelmed and either give up on practice ownership or burn out and leave medicine altogether. My team and I are here to change that by showing you how you can slow down to speed up, grow your practice while taking back your time, and achieve an increased sense of satisfaction both at work and outside of work. Because what is the point of any of this if you're not enjoying it? Today, we are deep diving into the core of dentistry, exploring it not just as a profession, but as a profound passion. Kirk Teachout guides us through the intricate art of setting boundaries and navigating challenging conversations within the tightly woven tapestry of a dental practice. We discussed building a seven-figure dental practice while reclaiming your time and energy. Kirk shares the key strategies that empower providers to craft lifestyle practices that prioritize their well-being rather than succumbing to the relentless demands of their profession. Now, I want to share with you something that Kirk and I discussed after we finished recording, but I think it's super important to highlight here. And it's that not only are burnout rates high in general in healthcare, but especially in dentistry. There's a lot to contend with in dentistry. And, something that he shared with me is just this idea that every day dentists go to work and they hear multiple times a day, sometimes right to their faces, how much they're hated, despised, how much people dread going there. And this may also be true in other areas of practice, but this really shows up when we look at some of the data about dentists. And you may know this, but dentists have higher rates of depression and suicide compared to other healthcare providers, and they are frequent victims of embezzlement by their staff. In fact, as much as 48% of dentists have lost upwards of $50,000 to employee embezzlement, sometimes more. And as Kirk and I were talking, especially during the interview, I couldn't help but think of how important it is to really embrace the teachings that his company is offering in their coaching program. And I can't help but think that when you're able to rest, not be overworked, and also have a business model that allows for excellent income regardless of hours worked or number of patients seen, that kind of relief coupled with like improved systems, ways to connect deeply with and empower your team to embrace your vision and values really lends itself to improved outcomes overall. When we're stressed and overwhelmed, it's really hard to see the warning signs and the red flags, even if in retrospect, they look glaringly obvious. So from my perspective, the work that Kirk and his team are sharing with the dental world is imperative to your well-being and success as a practice leader. And by the way, in case you're not a dental provider and you're inclined to click out of this episode, I just want to share with you that the wisdom in this episode really is for all providers, but I really wanted to get this plug in for our listeners in the dental field. So here's more of what we did record. We talked about boundaries. We explored like practical techniques for defining and upholding boundaries, fostering a healthier environment with both staff and patients. We talked at length about reputation and relationships, and Kirk sheds light on the delicate balance between maintaining this, a great reputation and addressing challenging individuals. And something that we were pondering is like, how can dentists uphold their practice's values while navigating the intricacies of community perception? And he shared a story about a patient who needed, let's say, redirection and how that improved their connection both with the patient and with their staff. And along those lines, he talked about how they have kind of this internal selective patient policy where, aligning patient selection with the core ethos of the practice happens right there at the front desk. And they have empowered their receptionist to ask a few questions and get a clear picture on whether or not a patient is a good fit for their practice. And this kind of strategic alignment can cultivate a more harmonious and fulfilling environment for everybody, for the staff, for the provider, and also for your patients. Like, they feel it, right? They feel it when they walk in the door. We talked a lot about growth through discomfort and how embracing discomfort as a catalyst for personal and professional growth is a seldom discussed yet vital aspect of success. So listen closely as we explore the transformative power of facing adversity head on and emerging stronger on the other side. And toward the end of our conversation, finally, we reflected on his overarching message, which is that the profound significance of boundaries, courage, and continual growth within the realm of practice leadership can be extremely liberating. And remember, I'll just say this again, the wisdom shared in this episode transcends the realm of dentistry. So whether you're a healthcare provider or an individual striving for personal growth, this is a way to empower yourself with envisioning your ideal future, cultivating meaningful connections, and embracing discomfort as a catalyst for transformative change. So let's dive into my conversation with Kirk Teachout. Kirk, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy, for having me.
I'm excited to dive into this conversation. We don't often get to talk with people in the dental field. We have a handful of guests who have been connected with dental. So it's good to bring you on to learn about this. For our listeners, I would say probably everything that we talk about applies to any healthcare practice. So if you're not a dental provider, don't click out of this episode. So let's go from there.
Yeah.
Tell us where you're located and tell us about your company, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I am right outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And what I do is I help on the operations side, obviously, with dental practices, trying to optimize people's practices. But really, it's trying to help doctors create a lifestyle practice that revolves around their life that they want versus their life revolving around their practice, feeling like they have to capture every patient, be there all the time. I mean, I could tell you right now, we've been to the office for emergency visits 3 times in the last 4 years, and probably only one of them was a true emergency.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them were very early on, where like you feel right that you have to be there for an emergency visit. But most people, are good with an antibiotic, and you can get them in on Monday. So what I try to do is I try to create like an ideal vision for people, because I feel like that's where most people suffer a lot. They don't have a big enough vision, or they just don't have a clear vision. And then we look at their ideal patient, we look at their ideal practice, we look at their ideal team, and then start coaching them on how to have difficult conversations. So
that's their favorite part, right?
Oh yeah, that is the number one reason why people come to me.
I can't wait to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah.
But there's such an important piece of the puzzle. I think something, and maybe you've experienced this with your clients as well, something that we see with our clients is like embracing the idea that they're a CEO and a leader. And so that leadership piece can be challenging because they're often more focused clinically. Do you see that with your clients?
Yeah. I mean, that's the number one struggle I feel like when doctors come out of school in general, because I know that's the number one question I get asked from dental students and medical students even that follow me is, what should I do to get ready to go into practice? And I tell them every time, work on your leadership. Work on your leadership and save cash, because every doctor gets out of school and they start spending money because they're a doctor now.
Yeah.
But if they can work on their leadership, I typically give them the three books I give to all my clients, which is The Go-Giver as the first one, changing your mindset to where you're a go-giver, servant leadership versus a go-getter where you're dictating. Then Extreme Ownership with Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. I love a good Navy SEAL book, but it's really great. Just taking ownership in your leadership, not uh, diverting responsibility onto others,
Mm,
taking responsibility for everybody's actions and your own actions. What can you do better to give people resources to be successful? And then the compound effect. That
mm,
small incremental changes are going to make massive output and results on the back end. Same thing with atomic habits. Those two and two go parallel to each other. But those are the three things that I really suggest to doctors that are still in school. I'm just like, look, you need to work on your leadership. Read books, you need to listen to podcasts. You need to work on it just 10, 15 minutes a day. And
yeah.
then practice on your classmates and on the patients that you're working on in clinic, because that is how you're going to be able to get ahead of the game when now you have 15 different hats you have to wear and you have a team to run that you've never managed before. So, there's not really bad teams, as Extreme Ownership talks about. There's no bad
Right.
teams, just bad leaders. So
Yeah. I
I would
mean,
say that's number one thing.
that's, wouldn't it be great if every school prepared people this way? Or
Oh
maybe we
man.
wouldn't have jobs, but
Right.
is this good or bad? I'm not sure. No, but in all seriousness, that's just a set of life skills, no matter what one decides to do. Like, you don't
Mm.
have to be heading up a company or a division or whatever to be a leader. Like, there's so many times in life when leadership is going to be required, right?
Yeah.
So, and then thinking about like the intentional attachment to that, right? Like, okay, so I know when I finish dental school that I want to have my own practice. I might work in another practice for a couple of years, but my end goal is to have my own practice. What a gift you give people to say, like, look, start working. This is all, I mean, this lands in my realm as well. Like, this is all personal development, right? And
Yeah.
the thing that, good, bad, or indifferent, if you're going to have your own company, every single button that you have, and then a handful of buttons you didn't know you had, will be pushed. And so it's so much more than just running a company or just running a practice. It's also like, if you're not careful, you might feel like you're in the trenches all the time. And we didn't sign up to be in mano a mano combat. We signed up to, be a provider. So I think that's like really good advice. Do they take you up on it?
Yeah,
Do they read
yeah. I
those
mean, a lot of
books?
times they really do. Like, I'm keeping up with people as I'm giving them that advice, and they're like, "Hey, I bought those three books." I'm like, "Okay, have you read them yet?"
Yeah.
Because that's the difference, right? Because,
Yeah, you
you know,
open it.
inaction is still nothing. Yeah, I mean, you still
Yeah.
have to read it or at least listen to it on Audible like I do.
Yeah.
And those are the three books I listen to every year, just
Amazing.
constantly.
Yeah.
They make a big difference.
So, side note to that, when you re up listening to these books each year, do you hear something different each time?
Oh, every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every time, because your circumstances change every year, your parameters around your life. I mean, just the way you've learned and now where you are, how you've grown. Now you're seeing things through a different lens, so
Yeah.
you catch things just differently every single time you read something,
Yeah.
which is why I try to read something at least once a year. Um, but yeah, definitely.
A book that I go back to regularly is The Big Leap by Gay
Mm,
Hendricks. And I'll tell you, the first time I read it, I wasn't in a very good place in my life circumstances.
mm,
And I got really, really irritated with it and I threw it down. There was way too much personal responsibility stuff and I was wallowing in some self-pity. So
yep.
I needed to work through that. But when I did pick it up again about 6 months later, I was like, dang, this book is so good. And yes, for the personal
Right.
responsibility and all that. But I just was in a place where I just like didn't want to hear it. But it's every time I pick it up now, my business has changed, my life has changed, things are different. Each year it's different. I always learn something different from it. So I love to hear that one could read these same three books or listen to these same three books and get something different each year from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not like crazy either. So it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I can apply this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like you have to turn your entire life upside down. I mean, the whole thing about incremental change, right, was a compound effect. Like we talk about this in our practice and we talk about like there is a time and a place for like a sharp turn, right? Sometimes we need to just scrap what we're doing and do something else. But in the absence of that, really the most important thing is like this incremental change, or like we call it constant course correction, where we're just going to check in with things. We teach our clients this. You can make some small adjustments to one or two things and watch and see what happens. Follow your data, check in, see how you feel about it, what's going on, what the results are, 6 to 8 weeks maybe, and then you make another adjustment somewhere. But if you pull all the levers at once, you don't actually know what's working. So I'm assuming the compound effect talks about that. That sounds like it would.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting. So, okay, I'm curious about you because you told me when we were in the green room that you are a musician turned dental 7-figure dental office coach. So, what? How did you get there?
Yeah. So that's a good question because, and I get that question all the time, when people find out I was a musician and still am. But it really came down to my wife being out for a couple of years as an associate. And she was like, okay, the only way I can pay off, this $500,000 in student loans is to be a practice owner
Mhm.
and to be able to, dictate a little more of my schedule and time and work, to be able to do the things I know that should be done and that I want to do, and the team that I want and the culture that I want, not just dread going to an office. So will you help me? And I remember that question just so I could see her face still 4.5 years ago. Will you help me? And me being the loving husband that I am, I just said, yeah, let's do it. I've never owned a dental practice before in my life. So, but I did come from a very entrepreneurial spirit as far as like in the music industry, you're always working in business and trying to create raving fans of your music and marketing and website design, logo design, all that stuff. So, and I had created a successful business in the music industry as well. So when she asked me that, it wasn't just jumping into the complete unknown, but it was jumping into an industry that I had no clue the difference between a pro fee or a cleaning, which are the same thing, and like just all sorts of stuff. So, like anything, when you're trying to learn a new language, you immerse yourself in it. So I did. I immersed myself in the dental field. I took a position in her practice, um, put it to where, as a female doctor, she was afraid that she was not going to get the respect or authority
Mhm.
that she was gonna, or that she would get from like if she was a male doctor. So I had intentionally put her as that leader and me just be kind of the background person. So they would all go to her for everything. But what it did too was it increased her leadership skills. So instead of everybody looking to me and even me being years ahead of her from a business acumen, she was able to help grow her leadership skills and just being thrown in the fire, but allowing me to coach her on the back end. And this is where, that daily back and forth of not knowing how I need to coach my wife, and the things I need to say and not say. It's very difficult sometimes when you're working with your spouse and they're hurting. And as a male, I want to just provide a solution, but she just wants me to listen. Um, but then there's that fine line of just I got to tell her what it is and how she
Yeah.
needs to go about it. But that's how I got in. She asked me if I would, and so I did. And now I'm loving it. It's great. I love seeing the same reaction on all these other doctors' faces that I work with.
Yeah. It's interesting, working with your spouse is, the big joke is like if you want to test your marriage, like do wallpaper together. I think
Mm,
also run a business together.
yeah.
Yeah, it can
Yeah.
be. I think you probably learned very quickly where you needed to improve your communication and draw the lines and
Mm,
all of that stuff. And I would imagine that beefed up your coaching skills very quickly, right? Because you're
Yes.
not, the line is already there with a client who's not your spouse, right? So you
Yeah.
don't have to, I mean, you do have to mind your boundaries and all that, but like it's so much more clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
Because you're
take
just spending the
much less
hour
risk.
together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You take you
Yes.
take much less risk with your wife or your spouse than you do your client.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I'll just tell them how it is. I'm like, look, you need to buck up and
Mm-hmm.
stop complaining.
Mm-hmm.
Although I have done that with my wife.
I bet that went over real
Um,
well.
actually, I mean, she'll tell you that, the team kind of, we do one-on-ones every month with the whole team. And they always joke about how me and my wife do one-on-ones every day on the way
Mm-hmm.
home, about the day and what went well and what didn't go well and how we can fix it. But one day she was upset, she was complaining, and I just looked there. I was tired, and I was just like, "Look, did you do anything about it? No. Are you going to do anything about it? No. Okay, then stop complaining about it because I don't want to hear it. So either do something about it or don't complain about it." And later on, like obviously, yes, it wasn't well received, but later on, she looks back and she'll tell you that, I started having more difficult conversations because she knew, almost like a pride thing, right? An ego thing. If she got into the car and she was complaining about it, I would ask her that question.
Yep.
Well, are you going to do something about it, or are you just going to talk about it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the approach that I take with my clients now, knowing that it worked for my wife. Um, because, lip service is cheap, talk is cheap,
Yeah.
but the ability to take action to get rid of the frustrations in your life, I mean, really, you're your biggest bottleneck. And it's because of your inaction that those bottlenecks happen.
Always. Can you repeat that? let's let's play that back.
Right, right. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like you are your biggest bottleneck, and it's your inaction that allows those bottlenecks to happen. And when you are able to have clear, difficult conversations quickly, like that's something that I teach the team very early on. Anybody who's onboarded new in the team, I will tell them, look, do you like constructive criticism? And of course, nobody does. But like basically, I'm trying to gauge if they're coachable or not,
Hmm.
because I'll tell them, like, look, I'm going to rebuke you quickly. I'm going to make adjustments quickly in private, but I'm going to praise you quickly in public. So we make sure that that's something that the team is okay with. Because at the end
Hmm.
of the day, like, if you can't take criticism, if you can't take small adjustments before they become big problems, then it's not going to work out, because we have a very high standard and we need to make sure that everybody's on board with that vision.
Yeah.
And if they are, then great. And they know early on that I've already told them that. So if I come to them like, hey, you said you were okay with this. It's like, I'm coming at it with love. I love you. I care for you, and I have your best interest in mind. So it's not just about the office, it's about you personally.
Yeah.
And that's where that go-giver spirit, servant leadership comes into play,
Hmm.
where it's not about me. Obviously I'm going to do what's best for the office if there's a cancer in the office. But at the end of the day, I also want to know what's best for them. And if it can create a better human being out of them by having those difficult conversations, then I'm going to do it every time.
Yeah. I think, what comes to mind when I'm hearing you say this is like it's the growth mindset, right? If we're familiar with Carol Dweck's work, a person who's growth oriented will always want to grow and learn how to do better and be better. And there's a certain amount of coachability, I think, that's just connected to a growth mindset, even if we don't like what we're hearing, right? Sometimes, like
Sure.
I say this to my kids sometimes, listen, you can tell me anything. I might not like it, but it's on me to figure out how to reconcile not liking what I'm hearing,
Mm,
in order for my kids are older. So for us to, have a great relationship going forward as they fly out of the nest. But we also have those kinds of conversations with our team. Like, And it's hard. It's very uncomfortable, but it's also incredibly liberating to get it out, to work it out and move on,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So do you help your clients with that too? Or you're teaching them how they can go and build a team in a similar way that you've built your team?
Yeah. Yeah. So I take the approach of selling the vision first. So I go
Mm-hmm.
with through them with their vision and helping them create that. But then I also coach them on how to sell that vision to their team.
Mm-hmm.
First, by apologizing.
Tell me more.
So I tell them to have a team meeting because most people don't, consistently anyway. And I tell them to go in and say, I'm sorry. I want to apologize. And this is where extreme ownership comes into play. So I want to apologize for not being the leader that you guys needed, but I've committed to changing. And now I'm going to be the leader you need.
Mm.
And then stating the vision. Here's what we're going to do. But in
It's
doing
powerful.
that, they're going to respect you for one, taking ownership, not placing blame. And they're going to listen to you now when you actually try to sell that vision to them versus just
Yeah.
here, oh, they're just telling me what I need to do, how I'm not doing it, how we're
Yeah.
not hitting our goals. It's like, look, if you apologize for being the reason why nobody's hitting their goals, for being the reason why nobody's having a good time at work, for being the reason why your patients are crap, then people respect you. It's like
Yeah.
that's another crux that a lot of doctors make mistakes with is the ability to fire your patients. It's like team culture is very important, but patient culture is equally important. You know, for coaches, I know like we always try to figure out how to acquire more people, right? Acquire more talent, acquire more people coming in, but we tend to lose sight of the team because we're always focused on how can we get more clients.
Mm-hmm.
But doctors tend to lose sight of the patients and they stop eventually focusing on their team because now it's just chaos altogether. But if you can have those difficult conversations, not only with your team, but also with your patients, 2 weeks ago, I had three difficult conversations and they were not prompted
Mm-hmm.
with patients in one day. It was one of the hardest days I have had. But at the end of that day, like you were saying, I felt liberated. One of the patients called back and apologized. Another patient left, and that's okay because we're not for everybody. And then the other patient it ended up apologizing last week. But still, what it did was, there were some disputes with my team between, my team is going to be up here every single time. They just weren't an ideal patient as far as not wanting to do work, ignoring all the things that are going on in their medical health. And I'm like, look, and just being rude about it towards our team. So I just told them, look, my team's going to provide an immense amount of value for you. But I also require our patients to respect us like we respect you. Is that something you can do?
Ooh.
And I just wait. I call it the pause, right? And I
Yeah.
wait. And the first lady, she was in her late 80s, and she would use the phrase, I don't mean to be ugly, but,
Here it comes. And you're in the
and
South,
when,
so we know what that means
yeah,
in the
right,
South.
right. So when you're saying that, an insult's about to come.
Yeah. Like, all right, all right. Got my
And they're
Teflon raincoat on. I'm good. It won't stick.
right. And she said, well, I apologized. And I'm like, no, ma'am, saying I don't mean to be ugly, but whatever you said is not an apology. That's an excuse. And you could tell, like, from the quiet moments in that conversation that nobody had ever pushed back to her, ever.
Mm.
And I was just kind. I was just like, look, we're going to provide this for you. And I want you to be here. I think that you can be an amazing patient, labeling her, right? So she can
Yeah.
rise up to that. But here's what I require. Can you do that? And it was an awkward 30 seconds, like
Oh, I
just
bet.
so awkward. But she said, do I need to come up there and apologize? I said, no, ma'am, we are fine. I just want to make sure that you are okay. And she did. She ended up coming up and apologizing to the team, and she's great, you know. And the one that left, a lot of doctors are like, no, I can't have those conversations. I'm like, look, if you're afraid that people are going to go around town and badmouth you, that's fine. You know
Yeah.
why? Because those problem patients also have friends that are all problem patients. So really, if you think about it, they're doing your job for you. They're telling everybody who are their friends that you don't want not to come to you.
Yep.
Bring it on.
Yeah, and the other side of that as well, as far as like reputation goes, like we had a client who had a similar thing. They needed to fire someone, and they were really really timid about it. And I was like, I'll do it. Blame it on your
Yeah,
business consultant. I'll do it for you.
right.
But their concern was they're in a small town, and she's married to somebody important, and and I was like, listen, here's the thing though, something to know. Just keep this in mind. I'll fire her for you if you want, but everybody who knows her knows her.
Yes.
And even if they're still going to be loyal to the end, they know what she's about. So if
Yeah.
she goes talking trash about you, trust that they're going to filter that with their knowledge of this person. So,
Right.
ultimately she self-selected, so it worked out. But yeah,
Yeah.
and I would bet also from the team perspective, going back to your story, your team, you're putting your money where your mouth is, right? Like you're showing them respect by not subjecting them to PITA. We call them PITA patients, right? Pain in the.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
you
we call them
are,
VIPs, but yeah.
oh, okay. I like that too. It's a little more cheeky.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Um, but it's like this, I am laying down the law here, and I'm
Yeah.
holding the door open if you're willing to step in based on the terms that I'm putting out here. And I
Yeah.
do think that that goes a long way with your team, because if they're cringing and dreading or drawing
Mm.
straws for who's going to
Yeah.
be with that patient that day, that really sucks. Like that's not
Yeah.
that doesn't fit the idea of, the culture where it's respectful and it's, pleasant, and 80% of the time we love being here and the 20% is just good. Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
because that's kind of a rule that we help our clients, like, aim for 80%, amazing. And that 20% is just good. Right.
Yeah.
Like there's always room for improvement.
Right.
But if you're getting lower than 80, something's off,
Yeah.
so to be really mindful of that. Interesting. Gosh, yeah. I think a big takeaway just from hearing that is like, it's okay to fire a patient. It's also okay to not take on a patient who shows up as, a potential VIP.
Yeah. Well, and that's where you have to train your team, right?
Hmm.
If they know that you have their back, which when you have those difficult conversations, they know that, right?
Hmm.
They respect you for it. But when they have that loyalty to you because you have that loyalty to them, then when your front desk is trained to filter 98% of those people, because you can figure out a lot of those people on the front end
Real quickly.
just by asking some very quick questions. Not even like a questionnaire, like just some very quick questions, their tone of voice, like, you always talk up the provider. If they're in a negative tone all the time, like you can tell.
Mhm.
And so we filter people out before they even get to the office, and we'll let them know, like, hey, I don't think you're going to be a great fit here for our office. I think there's a better fit for you.
Good.
And it makes your day so much better, which is the reason why we're able to create a seven-figure practice only working 3 days a week, because we have those people filter through, but we primarily only see the patients we want to see. And we only have the team members that we want. And everybody's like, oh, you're in a big city, you have no competition, you're doing this, you're fee for service, all these things. No, we're in a rural area. We don't work 14 hours a day. We work 8:30 to 4:30 with an hour lunch. And when I put out an applic or a job posting, I get one application from somebody who's not even qualified.
Mhm.
So like everything is stacked against me, and yet we're able to create this apple, is what I call it, in a rural area where people are attracted to it. People drive over an hour to our office
Wow.
because they love the experience that they get. And in the dental field, that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yes. Well, I was just thinking, of course you're going to have competition. I mean, even if you're in a rural area, because most insurance covers most dentists. And so it's really pick of the litter, so to speak. You can go
Yeah,
anywhere. And I don't know if y'all have looked at some buildings, medical, but there's like 12 dentists in one building. So even there, you have all the choice, right?
yeah,
So I would say it's almost probably more difficult. Like the degree of difficulty is probably even higher for you to create what you want to create. But like with investments, the higher the risk, the greater the reward. And
definitely,
so I think in this case too, like the degree of difficulty probably reaps much better rewards for you.
definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think there's I mean, this is such a rich topic, right? Like really sharing with our listeners what's possible. So two final questions for you. I
Yeah,
might throw in a third. We'll watch the time here.
that's
Um,
fine.
where if our listeners are hearing this and they're like, oh my gosh, this is like the manna from the heavens and I need more, how do they find you?
So I'm all over Instagram at Kirk Teachout.
Okay.
Um, I really need to hire somebody to help me because I'm messaging thousands of dentists a day. Um,
Okay.
and it's well, I say a day, a month. I'm hundreds a day. Um, but still, I'm messaging people like crazy on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, everything. But they could also email me, Kirk
Okay.
at fourthquartercoaching.com. And the fourth is IV. So I'm sure you'll have it in the show
Yeah.
notes.
We'll make
Um,
everything clickable and easy to find.
yeah,
That's a
but that's
lot of
the easiest way.
Instagram. Yeah. If I were to offer a piece of advice, I would say outsource at least part of
Oh yeah.
that.
Oh
Or
yeah.
get yourself
Already on
the
it.
the right bot or whatever to at least
Yes.
quick auto responses, right? Um, so if you were to leave one piece of like parting wisdom for our listeners, what would it be? The golden nugget.
There's so many.
I know you can do two if you really need to.
No. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is something I'm teaching my sons. I have 4 kids. I have 3 boys, and we just had our final child, which was a girl, this last November. And something I'm teaching my boys, who are just 5 and 6 right now, the older two, at the end of every shower, we turn it to completely cold. And for 30 seconds, they'll count. For 30 seconds, they have to stand there. Now, at first, and a lot of people are like, oh, you're a drill sergeant. I'm like, well, there's a purpose for this. I'm not throwing them in a lake. So for 30 seconds, they do that. And at first, they hated it. They screamed, they cried. But now, after a couple weeks, and we'll come in like, hey, you need to wrap this up. No, I haven't done the cold yet. They're getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And little things like that will make a massive difference in the way they approach things in life. Just by simply turning the shower to cold for 30 seconds at the end of your shower. And I would say to anybody, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, having difficult conversations, and getting comfortable with not only having difficult conversations with your team when they need to happen, but with your spouse, with your patients, with your friends. Here's a tough one with your family. Um, you would be surprised that all of it's just in your head. 99.9% of the time, our brains go to the worst case scenario. And 99.9% of the time, it's never the worst case scenario. So if your dad was always overbearing, or you felt this way when your mom was yelling at you, or your uncle was this way, your family's negative, whatever it is, like, talk to them. Most likely, they don't even realize it. And this is something me and my wife have done with our families. We've had difficult conversations with our families, and now we have a much stronger relationship with our families. Now, if you can do that with your practice, you're going to have a much deeper, a much stronger relationship with not only your team, but also your patients. And they will be your biggest fan.
Yeah. It goes back to liberation. A lot of times when we have those difficult conversations, it's not a surprise to anybody.
No,
It's the elephant in the room that we know
they knew
is
it was
there.
coming.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like relieving the pressure. Well,
Mhm.
Kirk, this was so great. I think that our listeners are going to take away a lot, and I just so appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. A huge thank you to Kirk for sharing such invaluable expertise with us today. His insights on boundaries and empowering your team will undoubtedly make a lasting impact on your practice. We learned by our conversation that when you get clear on your overall vision and the type of practice that you want to build, you really can set yourself up for success without overworking. Remember, it's not just about being an excellent provider, it's about creating a strategic direction and vision for your practice. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd like to ask a favor of you. Please take a few moments to leave a review so more practice owners like you can learn from myself and our incredible guests. If you would like to be part of a growing community of practice for providers like you, join us at one of our upcoming meet and greet events. Go to thrivingpracticecommunity.com and click on Join the Waiting List to learn more. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.